8 years. 8 years without a single word. No cry at birth. No first mama. No laughter with sound. Diane Mitchell, 34, CEO of a $45 million data analytics firm, would trade everything she'd built just to hear her daughter speak one time. But today, clutching two pieces of paper in her executive office overlooking downtown Denver, she faced a different equation. The hostile takeover notice from tech venture capital sat in her left hand, $72 million in a ticking 90-day clock. The school district recommendation form occupied her right, clinical language suggesting Sophie's transfer to Meadowbrook Special Needs Program. 8 days to demonstrate progress. The city stretched below her floor-to-ceiling windows, October sunlight glinting off glass towers, oblivious to the choice crystallizing in her mind. Save the empire she'd clawed into existence, or save the one person who mattered more than profit margins and board votes. Sophie sat cross-legged by the window, blonde hair catching afternoon light, drawing with the focused intensity she brought to everything. 8 years old and impossibly silent, moving through the world like a ghost child who saw everything but touched nothing. Her latest creation sprawled across oversized sketch paper. A detailed park scene with swings and slides, stick figures of children playing, and in the corner, one small figure sitting alone, observing, always observing, never participating. Diane's phone buzzed. Board member Richard Chen, his message terse. Emergency meeting Monday 8 a.m. Tech venture upped offer to 8 a.m. Board split. Need your call. The papers crinkled in her grip. She'd built Apex Analytics from a college dorm room, coding through 70-hour weeks while pregnant and terrified, transforming a scrappy startup into an industry force. 12 years of sacrifice. Every venture capital pitch, every product launch, every hiring decision calibrated around one goal: provide Sophie with every resource money could purchase. The best specialists, the best schools, the best chance at a normal life. And yet here sat her daughter drawing pictures of isolation, trapped in silence deeper than any Diane could code her way out of. Sophie had been born on a February morning at Denver General Hospital, arriving 3 weeks early in a delivery room flooded with winter sunlight. The OB/GYN had placed the infant on Diane's chest, and Diane had waited for the cry. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, clearing airways. The baby's eyes opened, summer sky blue, and her tiny mouth formed shapes, but no sound emerged. Not a whimper, not a gasp, just profound, unnerving quiet. The pediatrician had run tests, vocal cords intact, hearing perfect, neurological scans unremarkable. Some babies are quieter than others, he'd assured her. Give it time. But 6 months became 12, and babbling never arrived. By 18 months, when other toddlers chattered in proto-language, Sophie communicated through gestures and expressions, her intelligence obvious in how she pointed at objects, how she sorted toys by color and size, how she understood every word spoken to her. She just never spoke back. The diagnosis came 3 weeks after Sophie's third birthday. Selective mutism, likely rooted in psychological trauma during birth, though no one could pinpoint what or how. The specialist from Children's Hospital Colorado had delivered the news in a beige office that smelled of hand sanitizer and defeat, explaining that Sophie's brain had somehow linked speaking with danger, creating an anxiety response so severe it paralyzed her vocal cords whenever she attempted communication. Physical capability existed. Psychological imprisonment prevented execution. The parade of experts began. Speech therapist, Dr. Patricia Sandoval spent 6 months working with flashcards and mirror exercises, trying to coax Sophie into making sounds. $200 per session, twice weekly, and Sophie sat silent, tears streaming down her face during the final appointment. Child psychologist Dr. Marcus Webb employed play therapy with puppets and dolls, creating scenarios where Sophie could practice conversations through proxy characters. $150 per hour, 40 sessions total, and Sophie manipulated the puppets without giving them voices. Dr. Helena Rodriguez flew in from Mayo Clinic, a nationally recognized selective mutism specialist who charged $5,000 for a 3-day intensive evaluation. She'd never encountered a case this severe. The anxiety loops ran too deep. Alternative treatments followed. a sound healer in Boulder who worked with Tibetan singing bowls, a hypnotherapist in Fort Collins who specialized in childhood trauma, an occupational therapist who tried sensory integration techniques. $300,000 across 8 years, each failure carving another piece from Diane's heart. School brought fresh wounds. Lincoln Elementary had tried, at least initially. Kindergarten teacher Mrs. Patterson organized ice cream socials and buddy systems, pairing Sophie with chatty classmates who might draw her out. The other children had been curious at first, intrigued by the pretty blonde girl who never made a sound. But 5-year-olds possessed limited patience for friends who wouldn't play house properly, wouldn't call out during tag, wouldn't laugh at jokes. By first grade, Sophie ate lunch alone at the corner table, a permanent fixture of solitude. Teachers learned to accommodate written assignments instead of oral presentations, pointing at answers instead of raising her hand. She tested at the top of her class academically. Socially, she barely existed. Diane had constructed a fortress around Sophie's silence. Private tutors replaced group activities where possible. Playdates happened under controlled conditions with children of other executives, carefully orchestrated gatherings that usually ended with apologetic mothers making excuses about early bedtimes. Weekends meant just the two of them, Diane reading aloud from chapter books, while Sophie drew elaborate illustrations, their communication a complex system of gestures, expressions, and occasional written notes on a dedicated whiteboard. It functioned, barely, but it wasn't living, and both of them knew it. The school meeting happened on a Monday, 2:15 in the afternoon, when Diane's calendar showed back-to-back investor calls. Mrs. Henderson's voice on the phone carried carefully controlled panic. Sophie had locked herself in the second-floor bathroom after a group presentation requirement. Diane canceled everything, arriving at Lincoln Elementary 20 minutes later to find Principal Dr. Walsh standing outside the bathroom door, speaking gently through the crack. Sophie was curled against the tile wall when Diane finally coaxed the door open, knees pulled to chest, face buried, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Diane gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling the small body trembling, and fury rose white-hot in her chest. Not at Sophie, never at Sophie, at a world that demanded participation in ways her daughter simply couldn't provide. Dr. Walsh's office came next, the principal settling behind her desk with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. The school board would review Sophie's case Wednesday of the following week. Lincoln Elementary had accommodated for 3 years, bending policies and creating workarounds. But Sophie needed specialized intervention they couldn't provide. Meadowbrook's special needs program had dedicated staff trained in severe anxiety disorders, smaller class sizes, modified curricula. It would be better for everyone. The words landed like physical blows. Diane kept her voice level, years of boardroom negotiations kicking in. Sophie wasn't special needs. She was selectively mute. Her intelligence exceeded grade level in every subject. She understood social dynamics better than most neurotypical children. She just couldn't speak. Dr. Walsh had been sympathetic but firm. 3 years without progress. The group presentation incident demonstrated Sophie's condition was deteriorating, not improving. The board met in 8 days. Unless Diane could present concrete evidence of meaningful progress, they would recommend transfer. For Sophie's own good. Driving home through Denver traffic, Sophie silent in the passenger seat, Diane's mind spiraled. 8 years of fighting, 8 years of specialists and strategies and late-night research sessions. 8 years of watching her brilliant, observant, kind daughter shrink further into herself while Diane exhausted every option money could buy. Maybe she'd been fighting wrong. Maybe, the thought made her throat constrict. Maybe she'd made everything worse by pushing so hard. Thursday afternoon arrived with autumn sunshine painting the city gold. Diane blocked out 3:30 onward every Thursday, sacred time carved from conference calls and product launches and investor negotiations. They'd established the routine 6 months ago after Sophie's previous therapist suggested consistent, low-pressure social exposure. Riverside Park stretched along the South Platte River, recently renovated playground equipment in primary colors, cottonwood trees turning yellow at the edges. Sophie went straight to the swings, settling into the same seat she always chose, pumping her legs in the rhythm she'd perfected over months of practice. Diane settled on their usual bench, extracting her phone to field emails about the tech venture situation. Her lawyer's message made her jaw tighten. Board leaning towards sale. Need to show growth trajectory or they'll vote without you. She typed a response, deleted it, started again. Footsteps approached, small and thunderous. A boy exploded onto the playground like a natural disaster, brown hair flying, voice carrying across the equipment. Hi, I'm Noah. You want to be astronauts? I'm the captain. You can be the star-looker at person. The child bounced towards Sophie's swing with the confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. 6 years old, maybe, freckles scattered across his nose, wearing a Captain America t-shirt 2 sizes too big. Sophie's usual response to direct approach involved turning away, body language screaming discomfort. But something in this boy's energy registered different. He didn't wait for answers, just launched into elaborate explanation of the mission parameters while demonstrating rocket launch technique from the top of the slide. A man followed at measured pace, clearly accustomed to his son's exuberance. 6'2", broad shoulders filling a gray hoodie that had seen better days, jeans with worn knees, work boots scuffed at the toes. Mid-30s, brown hair cut military short, jaw shadowed with several days' stubble. He moved with the careful economy of someone managing chronic pain, favoring his left side slightly, and his hands, large, calloused, scarred across the knuckles, spoke of physical labor and real consequence. He approached the bench where Diane sat. Mind if I sit? My kid has enough energy for 3 playgrounds. The voice carried the faint rasp of someone who'd shouted through smoke. Diane's first instinct was polite decline, maintaining the barrier she always kept between Sophie and strangers. But something in his manner stopped her. He didn't stare at Sophie, didn't ask immediately why she wasn't playing with the others. Just gestured at the bench with a question, not an assumption. She nodded. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for several minutes, both watching their children. Noah had progressed to the monkey bars, providing running commentary on his journey across the lava pit. Sophie remained on her swing, but Diane noticed her daughter had stopped moving, attention fixed on the animated boy. Not the usual wariness, something closer to curiosity. Your daughter's very observant, not a question, a statement of fact. She's cataloging everything, isn't she? How Noah moves, how the other kids respond to him, the whole social dynamic. Diane turned to look at him sharply. Most people called Sophie shy when they were being kind, special when they thought Diane couldn't hear. No one had ever called her observant with such obvious respect. The man kept his eyes on the children, giving Diane space to process. Most people don't notice that. I work with a lot of kids. He gestured toward Noah, who was now demonstrating space jumps from the swing set. Some learn by doing, some by watching. The watchers often understand more than we give them credit for. He paused, then added, Noah's teaching method might be unconventional, but he's actually pretty good at including everyone, even if they don't respond the traditional way. As if to prove his point, Noah had circled back to Sophie's swing. Hey, silent astronaut, watch this. He proceeded to demonstrate what he called moonwalking across the playground surface, exaggerated slow-motion steps that made Sophie's lips curve slightly. Not quite a smile, but closer than Diane had seen with any stranger in months. Noah seemed to take this as sufficient encouragement, continuing his space mission narrative while occasionally glancing at Sophie as if she were his co-pilot, integral to the mission whether she spoke or not. The man extended his hand, Ryan Carter. His grip was firm, direct, no lingering, calluses pressed against her palm. Diane Mitchell. What do you do, Diane Mitchell? I run a data analytics firm. She heard how the words came out, clipped and corporate, and tried again. Software that helps hospitals optimize patient care. Her turn. And you? Community sports programs for kids. Used to be a firefighter, Denver Fire Department, Station 8. 11 years. After the beam fell wrong and my back couldn't handle the physical demands anymore, I figured I could still fight for kids even if I couldn't fight fires. He said it casually, but Diane caught the weight beneath the words. The way he sat suddenly made sense. The careful posture, the slight favor to one side, the underlying tension of someone who'd learned to function through constant low-level pain. She noticed his hands again, the scars taking on new context. Burns, probably. Falling debris. The end of one life, the beginning of another. I specialize in kids who've been through trauma. Fire survivors, abuse cases, foster system, movement-based therapy techniques. Diane's attention sharpened. 8 years of specialists, and none had mentioned movement-based anything. Speech therapy happened in offices with flashcards. Play therapy occurred in rooms with toys and supervision. Clinical environments, controlled settings, traditional approaches. Movement-based? Speech centers and motor cortex are linked in the brain. Sometimes kids who can't talk in traditional therapy settings can find their voice during play. The physical activity bypasses some of the anxiety blocks that prevent speech. He gestured toward Noah, who had now organized an impromptu game with 2 other children, something involving pretend cooking. The game created structure where speaking was just part of the pattern, not a performance. Kids who feel like they're supposed to perform usually shut down. But if talking is just another element of play, like running or jumping, sometimes it slips through the cracks. Diane absorbed this, mind already cataloging implications. $300,000 on specialists who had Sophie sit still in chairs, focusing on her inability to speak. No one had tried letting her move first. Noah's approach, Ryan continued, watching his son assign Sophie the role of taste tester, seems chaotic, but it's actually brilliant inclusion. He doesn't wait for responses, just assumes everyone's playing, takes all the pressure off. They watched the children for another few minutes. Noah presented his sand pie to Sophie with dramatic flourish. Sophie, in turn, gave a solemn thumbs up. Noah's face lit up like she'd delivered a speech. Ryan stood, joints audibly cracking, another reminder of the body that had betrayed his first career. We're here most afternoons around this time. Noah would be thrilled to have a consistent co-astronaut. He walked away before Diane could respond, collecting his son with easy affection, the 2 of them heading toward the parking lot. Sophie remained on the swing, but as they left, Diane saw her daughter's lips move. No sound, but clear formation of a word. Bye. Diane's breath caught. Sophie hadn't attempted speech in 6 months, not since the last failed therapy session. And here, after 30 minutes with a hyperactive 6-year-old and his father, her mouth was forming words again. The pattern established itself over the following week with organic inevitability. Monday through Friday, 3:45, Riverside Park. Ryan and Noah arrived within 10 minutes of Diane and Sophie each afternoon. The scenarios varied. Pirate treasure hunt on Monday, deep sea explorers on Tuesday, dinosaur excavation on Wednesday, space mission on Thursday, superhero training academy on Friday. Each time, Noah assigned Sophie a role that required no verbal participation. You're the lookout. You guard the treasure. You're the scientist who tests the rocks. Sophie engaged more each day, not dramatically, but incrementally, like ice melting so slowly you didn't notice until suddenly there was water where frozen surface had been. Monday, maintained eye contact with Noah for 3 full seconds. Tuesday, held the foam ball when he passed it instead of letting it drop. Wednesday, drew a picture for Noah, a pirate ship with 2 figures on deck, and actually handed it to him instead of leaving it on the bench. Thursday, smiled. Not the polite half-curve she gave adults who tried too hard, but genuine amusement at Noah's pratfall from the slide. Friday, nodded when Noah asked if she was having fun, a clear up-down motion, deliberate communication. Ryan brought 2 coffees starting Tuesday, wordlessly offering one to Diane. Black drip for him. He'd somehow intuited her preference. Oat milk latte, extra shot. They sat in comfortable semi-silence, occasionally commenting on the children's play or park maintenance crews working on the south side. Nothing deep, nothing probing, just the companionable quiet of 2 parents watching their kids navigate childhood. But Diane noticed the differences accumulating between them like geological strata. Her Tesla Model X in the parking lot, his 2008 Ford F-150 with the dented rear panel, her $7 latte, his $2.50 drip, her cashmere coat, his canvas jacket patched at the elbows. He never commented, never seemed resentful or intimidated, just quietly proud in a way that made Diane hyper-aware of her own privilege. Wednesday afternoon, conversation drifted toward Ryan's program. Second Chances operated out of a converted church basement near 5 Points, serving 15 kids from low-income families. He described it matter-of-factly: donated equipment, volunteer coaches, sliding scale fees that usually meant free. The county had pulled funding 30 days ago, budget cuts and reallocation. They had 60 days until forced closure unless new donors stepped up. How much do you need annually? The question escaped before Diane could stop it. CEO instincts identifying problem and calculating solution. Ryan's posture shifted slightly, pride flaring behind his eyes like struck matches. We'll figure it out, always do. Diane backed off, but mental gears had already turned. 15 kids, quality programming, 60 days. She could write the check without denting her quarterly bonus. But his body language screamed that offering money would destroy whatever careful balance they'd established. So she filed it away, noted for later. Friday afternoon, Ryan's phone rang while Noah demonstrated his superhero landing technique. He stepped away, but Diane caught fragments of tense conversation. No, Melissa, you can't just... 4 years. He doesn't even remember you. He returned with his jaw tight, expression carefully neutral. Sorry, my ex. Everything okay? She's back in Denver. Wants to reconnect with Noah. He didn't elaborate. Diane didn't push. But she filed this away too, another layer of complication beneath Ryan Carter's patient, steady surface. The man who helped traumatized children find their voices was navigating his own battles. It made him more real, less saint, more human. Somehow that mattered. Friday afternoon, as they gathered belongings, Ryan made the offer that had clearly been building all week. There's a special Saturday session tomorrow. Just 3 kids, Sophie, Noah, and one other. Focused work on communication through play. Would Sophie like to come? Diane hesitated. Every protective instinct screamed caution. She barely knew this man. Yes, he seemed qualified. Yes, Sophie responded to him. But trusting a stranger with her daughter in an unsupervised setting after 8 years of failed interventions? The risk felt enormous. Sophie solved the dilemma by tugging Diane's sleeve and nodding with unusual firmness. The first time in memory, she'd expressed clear preference to do something with someone outside their tiny household of 2. Ryan provided the address, 10 a.m., no pressure either way. Driving home, Diane felt the school board deadline pressing against her ribs like broken glass. 5 days until the meeting. 8 days until potential transfer. And her daughter had nodded yes to spending time with a man they'd known for 5 days. Either Diane's judgment was catastrophically impaired, or Sophie recognized something Diane couldn't yet articulate. The Second Chances Community Center occupied the basement of a former Methodist church in 5 Points. Red brick building, surrounded by chain-link fence, neighborhood transitioning between gentrification and holdout. Diane pulled into the gravel lot Saturday morning with Sophie beside her, both of them quiet. The entrance led down concrete steps worn smooth by decades of feet, opening into a space that smelled of old wood, rubber floor mats, and decades of accumulated must. The gym was small, maybe 40 by 60 feet, walls painted cheerful yellow by volunteer hands evident in the slightly uneven coverage. Equipment scattered throughout: foam obstacles, jump ropes, a half-deflated medicine ball, plastic cones in primary colors. Duct tape held together foam floor mats. Storage bins bore Goodwill price tags. Everything spoke of tight budgets and careful maintenance, the kind of place that ran on dedication rather than funding. 2 other children waited when they arrived. Amy, maybe 7, sat cross-legged near the wall, wearing glasses held together at the bridge with medical tape, foster care system written in her careful stillness. Lucas, 9, bounced on his toes with ADHD energy barely contained, his father's military deployment patch on his backpack. These were Ryan's kids, the ones who couldn't afford private programs, who needed this space more than they needed polish. Ryan greeted them warmly but without fanfare, gesturing for Sophie to leave her backpack on the bench and join when ready. Noah immediately launched into explanation of the morning's mission: underwater treasure hunt requiring a science team. Sophie stood at the group's edge initially, old habits strong, but Noah's assignment came swift. Sophie's the lead marine biologist. She identifies what's safe to touch. The other children accepted this without question, and the game began. Ryan structured it with invisible skill, each child adding to the narrative using whatever communication felt comfortable. Noah started with enthusiastic detail about the sunken pirate ship. Amy drew an octopus guarding the entrance, holding up her sketch for others to see. Lucas acted out a shark attack with dramatic death scene that made everyone laugh. Sophie's turn arrived, and Ryan offered options without pressure. Draw, act, whisper to Noah who could speak for her or choose silence. Sophie drew, a detailed pearl inside an open treasure chest, colored with careful precision. Noah seized on it immediately. The magic pearl. But how do we know it's real? We need a scientist. He turned to Sophie with the trust of someone who'd never doubted inclusion. Sophie, you're the lead scientist. What do we need to test the pearl? Sophie hesitated, marker hovering over paper. Ryan knelt to her level, not crowding, just present. You can draw the equipment list, or write words, or tell me and I'll write for you, whatever feels right. Sophie drew test tubes and microscopes, a small scale, other scientific equipment. Noah translated enthusiastically, incorporating each item into their expanding narrative. The other children contributed supplies, building collaborative story, where everyone's input mattered equally. No hierarchy of verbal versus nonverbal communication, just creation. An hour into the session, Ryan transitioned to a new game. Circle time, he called it. Everyone sat cross-legged while a foam ball made its way around, each person naming one magical ingredient needed to test the pearl's authenticity. The structure provided rhythm, turn-taking made predictable by the physical object passing hand to hand. Amy went first, seaweed from the deepest ocean. Lucas followed, shark teeth ground into powder. Noah barely contained himself, jellyfish sparkles that glow in the dark. The ball reached Sophie. The circle held breath without knowing why, adults and children both sensing something balanced on the moment's edge. Sophie held the ball, blue eyes tracking its surface, fingers pressing into foam. 10 seconds? 20. The other children waited with patience Ryan had clearly cultivated. No fidgeting, no pressure, just space. 40 seconds in, Ryan shifted from his position across the circle, kneeling at Sophie's level but not directly in front of her. Giving her room. You know, he said, conversationally, I'm a little hard of hearing from all those fire alarms. Could you say it just a bit louder? His tone carried no demand, just friendly explanation, offering her an out if she needed it. Permission to try, without stakes. Sophie looked at the ball in her hands, at Noah, whose face showed encouraging patience, at Ryan, whose steady brown eyes held nothing but acceptance. At her mother, tears already gathering in Diane's eyes across the room. Sophie took a breath that lifted her small shoulders, chest expanding with effort. Her lips parted. The word emerged barely audible, like a leaf touching ground, but it emerged pearl. The single syllable exploded through Diane like thunder after 8 years of silence. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over, 8 years of desperate hope and accumulated grief releasing in one crystallized moment. Sophie had spoken, not a therapy exercise, not a coerced response, a voluntary word, chosen and delivered in front of witnesses. The other children, not understanding the magnitude, simply continued the game. Noah's face lit up with pure delight. Pearl, that's perfect! That's the best ingredient. Now we can test everything. Ryan stood slowly, his own hand not entirely steady as he brushed it through his hair. He met Diane's eyes across the gym, gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement, then turned back to keep the game moving. Not making a spectacle, not forcing Sophie into the spotlight, just letting the moment exist without weight. The session continued another 20 minutes, but Diane absorbed none of it. Her entire being focused on Sophie, who had returned to quiet observation, but seemed lighter somehow, as if speaking that single word had released pressure built over years. When the other children dispersed to different activities, Sophie walked to her mother with measured steps. Diane knelt and opened her arms, and Sophie stepped into them, allowing herself to be held in a way she usually resisted in public. They stayed like that for a longer moment, Diane's tears falling silently into her daughter's golden hair. When they separated, Ryan stood nearby with Noah, who for once seemed to understand something important had happened and was relatively still. Diane managed words past the constriction in her throat. Thank you. I don't think you understand what you just... 8 years. 8 years of silence. Ryan's expression softened, and she saw then that he did understand, perhaps more than she knew. Every child has their own timeline. Sometimes they just need the right key to unlock what's already there. Noah, unable to contain himself longer, bounced forward. Sophie talked. That's so cool. Maybe tomorrow she can say spaceship or dinosaur or... Ryan placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, and Noah stopped mid-sentence, though his eyes still sparkled. The four of them stood there in the worn basement gym, sunlight filtering through high windows, the moment stretching like blown glass, beautiful and fragile. In the car afterward, Diane's hands shook on the steering wheel. Sophie sat quietly beside her, looking out the window at Denver streets passing. 5 minutes of silence. Then clear as morning, can we go back tomorrow? Diane nearly drove off the road. Second sentence. Second impossible, beautiful sentence. Her daughter, who hadn't spoken in 8 years, was asking questions, making requests, engaging with the world through words. Yes, yes, sweetheart, we can go back. Her phone rang before she could process further. Richard Chen's name on the display. She almost didn't answer, but CEO training overrode maternal instinct. She tapped the Bluetooth connection. Diane, we have a problem. Tech Ventures pushing for emergency board meeting Monday morning. They want an answer by Wednesday. Either you're in the room making the case for growth, or we're voting without you. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples expanding outward. Monday morning, the same Monday she'd promised Sophie they could return to second chances. Tuesday and Thursday sessions Ryan had mentioned. The careful, fragile foundation they had just begun building. I'll be there. She ended the call before Richard could respond. Sophie watched her with those observant blue eyes, reading everything Diane tried to hide. The choice hadn't arrived yet, not fully, but Diane could feel it approaching like weather on the horizon. The company she'd built versus the daughter who'd just found her voice. 8 years she'd fought to hear Sophie speak. Now she'd heard 2 sentences, and the empire she'd constructed as security for her silent child was demanding she choose. The weekend stretched thin with tension. Saturday afternoon, Diane worked from home, laptop balanced on the kitchen counter, while Sophie drew at the table, both of them processing the morning's breakthrough in their own ways. Sunday brought park time again, but Ryan and Noah didn't appear. Diane found herself looking for the Ford F-150, feeling oddly bereft when the parking lot held only unfamiliar vehicles. Sophie swung alone, and the silence felt different now. Not prison, more like anticipation. Sunday evening, Diane's phone lit up with a text from Ryan. Noah wanted me to tell Sophie he's planning a new mission for Tuesday. Something about Mars. Wear red if possible. She showed the message to Sophie, who actually smiled and nodded, then disappeared to her room. 10 minutes later, she returned with a red t-shirt laid out on the couch, preparing for Tuesday like it was a certainty. That small act of planning ahead, of looking forward to something with another person, made Diane's chest ache. 8 years of Sophie merely existing. Now she was anticipating. Monday morning arrived with corporate warfare. The Apex Analytics boardroom occupied the top floor of their downtown building, glass walls overlooking the city. 8 board members and 2 investors seated around Italian marble. Richard Chen led the meeting, pulling up Tech Ventures' revised offer. $80 million, premium valuation, guaranteed retention of all current employees, Diane as advisor for 2-year transition. On paper, it was perfect. In reality, it meant losing everything she'd built. She made her case. Q4 projections showing 20% growth. The Medidata contract negotiations, potentially $50 million over 3 years. New product pipeline ready to launch. But Andrew Winters, the most influential board member, cut through her presentation with surgical precision. Can you guarantee the Medidata deal closes by year-end? She couldn't. Medical software procurement moved slowly, required extensive testing, involved committees and compliance reviews. 60% probability, maybe 70. Not the certainty boards craved. Tech Ventures money is certain, Andrew continued. And frankly, Diane, you've seemed distracted lately. Missing meetings, leaving early. This company needs focused leadership, especially during acquisition negotiations. The accusation landed true. She had been distracted. Sophie's school crisis, the breakthrough Saturday, the reordering of priorities happening beneath her conscious awareness. The company she'd bled for was slipping through her fingers because she'd finally started putting her daughter first. The meeting ended with a vote scheduled for Wednesday morning. Show meaningful progress on Medidata by then, or the board would recommend accepting Tech Ventures' offer. Andrew pulled her aside afterward. They want you in Chicago Tuesday through Thursday, face-to-face with Medidata's procurement team. It's our only shot, Tuesday through Thursday. The exact days Ryan ran his sessions at Second Chances, the days Sophie had started looking forward to, planning for, engaging with. Diane looked at Andrew's expensive suit, his Rolex, the trappings of success she'd once thought mattered more than anything. Now they felt like props in a place she'd stopped believing in. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. We're out of time. She returned to her office and stared at the city below. 8 years ago, when Sophie was born silent and terrified, Diane had made a choice. Build an empire capable of buying solutions. She'd succeeded spectacularly at empire building, failed utterly at finding the solutions money could purchase. And now the bill had come due. Go to Chicago, save the company, miss the moment when Sophie might speak again. Stay in Denver, watch the board vote her out, but be present for her daughter. Her phone showed 3:40. Park time. She gathered her things and left without explanation, arriving at Riverside Park to find Ryan and Noah already there. Noah was demonstrating his Mars mission concept, complete with red bandana tied around his head. Sophie had worn her red shirt, and Noah's face lit up like she had delivered a dissertation on planetary geology. Ryan sat on their usual bench, 2 coffees waiting. Diane settled beside him, and they watched the children in comfortable silence. Then carefully, I might have to miss Tuesday and Thursday this week. Work thing. Ryan's expression didn't change, but something cooled behind his eyes. Sophie needs consistency, especially now. She's starting to trust that people will show up. I know, believe me, I know, but I'm also facing a situation where if I don't handle this, I might lose my company. Sophie doesn't care about your company. He said it gently but firmly. She cares whether you're here when she finds her courage to try again. The words hit like physical impact. True and unfair and completely, devastatingly accurate. Diane had spent 8 years providing financial security. Sophie needed presence, and Diane was about to choose the same way she always had. Work over witness. They sat in tense silence while the children played. Noah was teaching Sophie his Mars landing technique, and she was actually attempting it, jumping from the low platform with exaggerated slow-motion movement. Small laugh bubbling up, still silent, but physical joy she rarely displayed. Ryan watched his son with the expression of someone who'd learned to find victory in increments. There's a special session Saturday, he finally said. Just Sophie, Noah, and maybe 1 or 2 others. More intensive work. Can you both make it? Yes, Diane committed immediately, already mentally rearranging Saturday conference calls. We'll be there. Good. He stood, joints cracking. She's got something special. Your daughter. Don't let her lose it by thinking you need to be perfect. Just present. He collected Noah, and they left. Sophie returned to the bench, and Diane saw her daughter's face fall watching them go. That small expression of disappointment, so rare, so painfully normal, nearly broke her. In the car, Diane made the call before she could reconsider. Andrew, I'm not going to Chicago. His response came heated. You're sacrificing the company for what? A few days? For being the mother my daughter needs instead of the CEO everyone expects. She ended the call and drove home in silence. Sophie beside her, the choice was made. Wednesday's board meeting would likely vote to accept Tech Ventures' offer. She'd lose her CEO position, possibly her seat entirely. 12 years of work, but Sophie was looking forward to Tuesday, planning for it, trusting Diane would be there. And that mattered more than profit margins. Her phone buzzed again. Text from Richard. You sure about this? No coming back if board votes, Diane typed quickly. I'm sure. Some things matter more than being CEO. She hit send before doubt could creep in. Sophie reached over and patted her hand, a gesture of comfort that 8-year-olds weren't supposed to understand, but Sophie somehow did. They drove through Denver streets as evening settled. October dusk painting everything amber. And Diane realized she'd spent 8 years building the wrong kind of security. Money couldn't buy Sophie's voice. But presence might cultivate space for Sophie to find it herself. Tuesday morning brought rain, unusual for October Denver, clouds hanging low over the city. The board meeting happened without Diane, Richard texting updates, Andrew pushing hard for sale, Jennifer arguing for your growth plan. Close vote. She ignored her phone and drove Sophie to second chances at the appointed time. The basement gym looked dimmer in rain-filtered light, but Ryan greeted them warmly, and Noah's enthusiasm filled the space like sunlight. The Mars mission commenced with elaborate detail. Sophie integrated seamlessly into exploration team. Halfway through the session, during a water break, Lucas asked Sophie directly, "What's your favorite planet?" The familiar panic flashed across Sophie's face. Diane tensed, ready to intervene, but Ryan smoothly redirected without making it obvious. "How about we all draw our favorite planets and see if others can guess?" He produced paper and markers as if he'd planned this contingency, which Diane realized he probably had. Every move calculated to create safety. Sophie drew Saturn with careful rings, and Noah guessed immediately, launching into facts about gas giants. Crisis averted. Trust maintained. Thursday's session followed similar pattern. Sophie participated more actively, her body language opening incrementally. She touched Ryan's hand at one point to get his attention instead of waiting silently. Significant progress, Ryan acknowledged with a quick smile before moving on. Noah remained her fierce champion, translating her gestures to others when needed, never making her feel broken or less than. After Thursday's session, as they gathered belongings, Ryan handed Diane a small piece of paper. "Sophie wrote this during free time. Wanted you to have it." The note, in Sophie's careful handwriting, "Thank you for staying." Diane's eyes burned. 4 words. 4 impossible, beautiful words that meant Sophie had noticed, had understood, had appreciated the choice. She looked up to find Ryan watching her with something close to approval. Saturday's special session is still on. 10 a.m. Just the 4 of us this time. More intensive work. We'll be there. Thursday afternoon brought call from Dr. Walsh. The school board had reviewed Sophie's initial progress. The single word spoken during Saturday's session, verified by Ryan's written report. They'd granted 60-day extension, final evaluation scheduled for early December. Sophie had bought herself time, and Diane had chosen to be present for it. Friday brought the board's decision. Andrew's call came at 2 in the afternoon, his tone professionally neutral. Board voted to accept Tech Ventures' offer. Effective immediately, you're no longer CEO. They're bringing in outside leadership for transition. You can stay on as advisor if you want, but your active role is done. Diane absorbed this in her office, looking at the city she'd conquered, the empire she'd built and just lost. She felt hollow, but not in the way she'd expected. Not devastated, more like relieved. A weight she'd been carrying for 12 years suddenly lifted. What about the staff? Everyone keeps their jobs. Tech Ventures honoring that part. You did good work, Diane. Built something real. Just couldn't do it alone and be present for your kid. Nobody can. The sympathy in his voice surprised her. She thanked him, ended the call, and sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then she packed her personal items. Photos of Sophie, a coffee mug Noah had drawn on during one playground session, her Stanford diploma that suddenly seemed less important than it once had. 12 years in one cardboard box. She carried it to her car and drove home, arriving at 3:30 to pick up Sophie from school. The park that afternoon felt different, lighter. Diane had no board updates to check, no investor emails to field, just coffee with Ryan while their children played. He noticed the change immediately. "You look different, less wound tight. Lost my company yesterday. Board voted to sell." He absorbed this quietly. "I'm sorry. That's got to hurt." Honestly, she watched Sophie laughing silently at Noah's antics. "It hurts less than I thought. Turns out I was holding on to something that was keeping me from what actually matters." Ryan's hand covered hers on the bench, brief warm pressure before withdrawing. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Time will tell." They sat in comfortable silence while autumn light stretched across the playground, children's laughter providing soundtrack, and Diane felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness exactly. Happiness? But the absence of constant pressure, the frantic scramble to control everything. Sophie had spoken twice more that week, small words in safe contexts, and Diane had been present to witness them. That mattered more than quarterly earnings. Saturday morning arrived cold, the kind of October chill that promised winter lurking just ahead. The special session at Second Chances felt different from the start. Only Sophie, Noah, Amy, and Lucas gathered in the basement gym, Ryan moving between them with focused intensity. He'd set up what looked like a storytelling circle, cushions arranged in a loose semicircle, soft lighting from corner lamps replacing the harsh overhead fluorescence. We're building an adventure together. Everyone contributes using whatever feels comfortable. Draw, gesture, whisper, shout. All methods work equally. Noah launched in with typical enthusiasm, establishing their underwater exploration scenario. Amy added details about sea creatures through quick sketches. Lucas acted out encounters with dramatic flair. When Sophie's turn arrived, Ryan offered her the same options he always did. No pressure in his voice, just open invitation. She chose drawing, creating a detailed octopus with 8 precisely rendered tentacles, each one holding a different object. The story wove back and forth between children for close to an hour. Ryan suggested they act out portions, and Sophie actually stood, moving her arms in octopus tentacle motions while Noah narrated. The physical movement seemed to unlock something in her, body language opening in ways Diane had never witnessed. During a particularly exciting sequence where they escaped from a sea monster, Lucas dropped the foam ball they'd been using as a magical pearl. It rolled to Sophie's feet. She picked it up without hesitation, held it out to Lucas. Here. The word cut through the space like light through fog, clear and deliberate, not whispered, not forced, just offered, natural as breathing. Lucas took the ball with a grin, continuing their game as if nothing monumental had occurred. But Diane saw Ryan's eyes widen fractionally, saw Amy's delighted smile, saw Noah's face light up with pride. Sophie had chosen to speak, not been coaxed or manipulated into it. The difference mattered. After the session, Sophie approached Ryan and tugged his sleeve. He knelt, and she whispered something Diane couldn't hear. Ryan nodded seriously. I'll tell him you said goodbye. He'll be happy to hear it. In the car heading home, Diane asked carefully, what did you tell Ryan? Sophie was quiet so long, Diane thought she wouldn't answer. Then, voice rusty but determined, tell Noah thank you. 3 words. 3 impossible, beautiful words strung together in a sentence that demonstrated thought and intention. Diane pulled into a King Soopers parking lot and turned to look at her daughter fully. Sophie, I'm so proud of you, and I'm sorry I almost missed this week. I almost chose wrong. Sophie reached out and patted Diane's hand, gesture of forgiveness that made Diane's eyes burn. They sat in the parking lot for several minutes, Saturday shoppers flowing around them, Denver autumn bright and sharp outside the windows. Diane felt the future reshaping itself, possibilities opening where before only walls existed. Monday brought the first real cracks in their fragile progress. Diane arrived at Second Chances for the regular afternoon session to find the parking lot nearly empty, Ryan's F-150 absent. She checked her phone, no messages. Sophie's face fell with visible disappointment, the first time Diane had seen her daughter express such clear expectation of someone outside their household. They waited 15 minutes before a text arrived. Family emergency, sorry for short notice, tomorrow for sure. The message felt wrong somehow, Ryan's usual steady presence replaced by terse anxiety. Diane responded with understanding, but unease settled in her chest. That evening, she found herself checking news sites for 5 points incidents, scanning for fires or accidents, anything that might explain Ryan's absence. Nothing. Just the normal chaos of city life continuing indifferent to individual crises. Tuesday afternoon, Ryan appeared at the park looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His jaw carried new tension, shoulders tight with stress, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Noah clung to his hand instead of exploding into the playground, unusual restraint that signaled his own confusion. Sophie noticed immediately, her observant gaze tracking Ryan's movements with concern. Diane waited until the children started playing before asking, Everything okay? Ryan's laugh held no humor. My ex-wife served me with custody papers yesterday. After 4 years of zero contact, Melissa wants joint custody, claims I'm an unfit parent. The words landed heavy. What's her argument? PTSD from the firefighting injury, the fact that I'm on disability, low income, unstable living situation. Her lawyer's painting me as a damaged veteran who can barely function. Never mind that I've raised Noah alone since he was 2, that he's happy and healthy, that I've built a life around helping kids. When's the hearing? 3 weeks. Her lawyer's pushing for expedited process, claiming Noah's in danger. It's bullshit, but family court doesn't always care about truth, just optics. And on paper, I look like exactly the kind of parent who loses custody. Sophie had drifted back to the bench, sensing adult tension. She sat close to Diane, watching Ryan with those careful eyes. Noah attempted his usual antics, but the energy felt forced, his glances toward his father frequent and worried. The boy understood more than anyone gave him credit for, reading his father's stress and body language and silences. What do you need? Ryan shook his head. Nothing you can do, just gotta figure it out like everything else. But Diane's mind was already working, CEO instincts kicking in despite no longer holding the title. Ryan needs a good attorney. You can't go into family court with a public defender against someone who's clearly hired expensive counsel. Can't afford expensive counsel. The program barely makes rent. I'm living off disability checks and whatever odd jobs I can pick up. Her voice softened. Let me help. I just lost my company, but I didn't lose everything. I know the best family attorney in Denver. Let me make a call. Ryan's pride flared visible in the set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched. I don't take charity. It's not charity. It's investment in something that actually matters. You gave Sophie her voice back. Let me help you keep your son. They sat in tense silence while the children played. Finally, Ryan's shoulders dropped fractionally. I'll meet with whoever you recommend, but I'm paying them back, even if it takes years. Fair enough. Diane made the call that evening. Patricia Valdez, the attorney who'd handled her own separation from Sophie's father years ago, owed Diane several favors. Patricia listened to the situation, agreed to take the case pro bono through a program her firm ran for veterans, and scheduled an intake meeting for Thursday. When Diane relayed this to Ryan via text, his response came terse. Thanks, I mean it. Wednesday brought Sophie's first major regression since the breakthrough. School pickup revealed tear-stained cheeks and a note from Mrs. Henderson. Sophie had a panic attack during group reading. Locked herself in the bathroom for 30 minutes. Please call. The drive home was silent. Sophie curled against the car door, body language screaming retreat. Diane felt the old, familiar helplessness rising, the sense that any progress was illusion, that Sophie would forever remain trapped behind walls of anxiety. They skipped the park that afternoon, staying home while Sophie drew in her room, door closed, refusing even written communication. Thursday's attorney meeting revealed the depth of Melissa's strategy. She documented Ryan's PTSD diagnosis, his disability status, even his program's funding issues. Her argument positioned Ryan as someone drowning financially and psychologically, unable to provide stable environment. The fact that Noah thrived despite these circumstances barely registered against the narrative she'd constructed. Patricia laid out the challenges with professional directness. Family courts prioritize stability. Melissa's a marketing executive with six-figure income, stable housing in California, established career. Ryan's a disabled veteran running a failing nonprofit, living month to month. The optics aren't good. But Noah doesn't even remember her. She abandoned him. Courts favor reunification. They'll see her return as positive, a mother who's gotten her life together and wants to reconnect. Ryan will need to prove he can provide equivalent stability. How? Character witnesses, documentation of Noah's well-being, evidence that Ryan's program succeeds despite funding challenges, anything showing he's not the liability Melissa's painting. Ryan sat rigid throughout the meeting, jaw tight, hands clenched on the armrests. Afterward, in the parking garage, his control finally cracked. I'm going to lose him. You saw her case. On paper, I'm exactly what she says. Broken, broke, barely functioning. You're not broken. You've built something real. Those kids at second chances won't matter to a judge who sees disability payments and PTSD diagnosis. Melissa's going to take my son, and there's nothing I can do about it. The defeat in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Diane wanted to fix it and to throw money at the problem until it resolved, but she'd learned enough about Ryan to know that approach would only push him further away. So she offered the only thing she could. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you need, I'm here. He nodded without looking at her, and they parted with tension thick between them. Friday afternoon, Noah arrived at the park subdued, asking Sophie immediately if she wanted to help him build something. He led her to the sandbox and began constructing an elaborate castle, talking less than usual, his small hands working with focused intensity. Sophie joined without hesitation, the two of them creating towers and moats in companionable quiet. Something had shifted between them from playmates to allies, united by circumstances they barely understood. Ryan and Diane sat on the bench watching. The silence stretched uncomfortable until Ryan finally spoke. Melissa showed up at Noah's school yesterday. Wanted to take him for ice cream. School called me, and I had to come explain why the woman listed as his mother on emergency forms couldn't take him anywhere. How did Noah react? Confused? Scared? He asked why Mom was back, where she'd been. I didn't know what to tell him. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his mother chose career over family, that she left and never looked back until it became convenient? You tell him the truth, age-appropriate but honest. The truth is that I'm terrified. Not of losing custody, though that's real, but of Noah thinking he's not enough. That if he'd been different, better, she wouldn't have left. Ryan's voice cracked slightly. That's the wound that never heals, thinking you're the problem. Diane understood that wound intimately. She'd carried it for 8 years, wondering what she'd done wrong to make Sophie silent. What failure in her parenting had created the anxiety that imprisoned her daughter. The guilt lived in her bones, shaping every decision, every desperate attempt to fix what she'd somehow broken. Sophie's not your failure. Ryan's voice had gentleness she needed. She's just Sophie, working through her own stuff at her own pace. You didn't make her silent. How do you know? Because I've worked with enough trauma kids to recognize the difference. Sophie's anxiety isn't about you. It's about her, about how her brain processes the world. You could have been perfect, whatever that means, and she'd still be exactly who she is. The words settled into spaces Diane hadn't known needed filling. She watched Sophie in the sandbox, head bent close to Noah's, working together on their architectural project. Her daughter, who couldn't speak to strangers, had found connection with a hyperactive 6-year-old and his damaged father. If that wasn't proof that healing came in unexpected forms, nothing was. That night, Diane made 2 calls. First, to an old Stanford classmate who ran a foundation funding youth programs. She pitched second chances, emphasizing community impact and measurable outcomes. Her contact promised to send someone for site evaluation next week. Second call went to an HR consultant she'd worked with at Apex, asking about documentation procedures for proving program effectiveness. Both conversations happened after Sophie fell asleep, Diane working from the kitchen table until midnight, rebuilding skills she'd let atrophy. The following Tuesday brought crisis that crystallized everything. A warehouse fire broke out 3 blocks from Riverside Park mid-afternoon, smoke visible over the tree line, sirens wailing in waves that made every dog in the neighborhood howl. Ryan froze mid-sentence talking to Noah, his face draining of color, hands starting to shake. The children noticed immediately, Noah's eyes widening with fear, Sophie's concerned gaze tracking Ryan's transformation. Dad? Noah's voice came small, scared. You okay? Ryan couldn't answer. His breathing had accelerated, chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes fixed on the smoke column. Diane recognized panic attack from her own experience, but this went deeper. Trauma response. Body convinced it was back in burning buildings, trapped under debris, feeling life slip away. He sank onto the bench, then to the ground, knees pulled up, trying to control breathing that had spiraled beyond his command. Noah started crying, and that seemed to reach Ryan through the panic. His hand lifted toward his son, but the tremors were too severe for comfort. Other parents at the playground had noticed, concern and judgment mixing on their faces. Diane moved to shield Ryan from view, kneeling beside him. You're safe. The fire's 3 blocks away. You're in the park with Noah and Sophie. You're safe. Her words didn't penetrate. Ryan's eyes had the glassy quality of someone no longer fully present, mind trapped in memory while body fought invisible threats. Noah clung to Diane, asking questions she couldn't answer. What's wrong with Dad? Is he sick? Why won't he talk to me? Then Sophie moved. She approached Ryan with none of her usual hesitation, sitting directly in front of him, small body blocking his view of the smoke. She took his large, trembling hands in her smaller ones, holding on with surprising strength. Her eyes met his, steady and calm, and she began making exaggerated breathing motions. Deep inhale, slow exhale. The same technique Diane had taught her for managing her own anxiety. You're safe. Sophie's voice came clear and deliberate, each word pronounced with careful precision. Fire is far. No one needs you here. The words cut through Ryan's panic like light through fog. His breathing stuttered, hitched, then began to mirror Sophie's exaggerated pattern. Inhale, hold, exhale. The tremors gradually lessened, color returning to his face in splotches. Sophie maintained eye contact, continuing the breathing demonstration. A small child anchoring a grown man to present reality through sheer determination. 5 minutes passed. 10. The sirens faded as emergency vehicles reached the warehouse. Ryan's breathing normalized, though sweat still sheened his forehead and his hands shook when Sophie finally released them. He looked at the girl with something like wonder. Thank you, brave girl. You brought me back. Sophie nodded solemnly, then stood and held out her hand to Noah. Come on, let's finish the castle. Noah hesitated, looking between his father and Sophie. Ryan managed a shaky smile. Go ahead, buddy. I'm okay now. Sophie helped. The children returned to the sandbox, though both kept glancing back to ensure Ryan remained stable. Diane sat beside him on the ground, not touching, just present. They watched their children work together, the easy partnership they developed over weeks of play translating to comfort in crisis. I'm sorry you saw that. Ryan's voice came rough. Not exactly the picture of stability Melissa's lawyer is painting me as lacking. Sophie just proved you've taught her more about managing crisis than any therapist. That's not instability. That's resilience modeling. Tell that to family court. I will if I need to. Diane meant it. Sophie finding her voice to help you, that's evidence of something powerful you've built here. Not just with your program, but with our kids. Our kids. The phrase hung between them, neither quite ready to examine its implications. But Sophie and Noah had become units somehow, two children who needed each other in ways that transcended typical friendship. Sophie had spoken to protect Ryan. That single act demonstrated more trust and courage than 8 years of therapy had extracted. The custody hearing arrived 3 weeks later on a gray November morning, Denver cold settling into bones. Patricia Valdez had prepared meticulously, but her final warning echoed in Diane's mind. Judges are unpredictable. Melissa's lawyer is good. Be ready for anything. The courtroom occupied the 3rd floor of Denver Family Court, beige walls and fluorescent lighting creating the institutional atmosphere of all government buildings. Melissa sat at the plaintiff's table, expensively dressed, posture perfect, every inch the successful professional. Her attorney, Martin Rothstein, carried the supreme confidence of someone who'd never lost a custody case. Ryan sat beside Patricia, wearing his only suit, purchased at Goodwill for his father's funeral 5 years ago, slightly too large now after weight loss from stress. Judge Sandra Reeves entered, a stern woman in her 60s with reputation for no-nonsense rulings. The hearing began with Melissa's testimony, Martin leading her through carefully crafted narrative. She'd been young when Noah was born, unprepared for motherhood, struggling with postpartum depression. The separation from Ryan happened amicably. They both agreed she needed help. She'd spent 4 years in therapy, building career stability, becoming the mother Noah deserved. Now she wanted to repair their relationship, provide him with advantages Ryan simply couldn't match. Martin presented evidence. Melissa's 6-figure salary, her 3-bedroom condo in Santa Monica, excellent school district rankings, therapist recommendations. Then came the attack on Ryan. PTSD diagnosis, disability income barely covering expenses, community program losing funding, Living situation questionable at best. Video footage of Ryan's panic attack in the park played on the courtroom monitor. Parents pulling their children away. Ryan on the ground unable to function. Patricia cross-examined aggressively. Why 4 years of silence? Why no child support payments? Why zero contact until custody suddenly became convenient? Melissa had answers prepared. Therapeutic guidance suggested distance for Noah's adjustment. Financial support sent through unofficial channels. Always monitoring from afar. Lies delivered with practiced sincerity. Ryan's testimony came next. Patricia led him through the truth. Raising Noah alone from age 2, building second chances to help kids like his son, managing PTSD through proper treatment and coping strategies, creating stable if modest home. The panic attack footage, triggered by proximity to fire, managed within minutes thanks to techniques he'd taught the children he worked with. Evidence of trauma managed, not dysfunction unchecked. Diane testified about Sophie's progress, Ryan's professional competence, the partnership that had formed between their families. Martin Rothstein attacked from every angle. How long had she known Ryan? 2 months? Was their relationship romantic? Not officially, but clearly heading there. Wasn't it convenient that a wealthy woman without CEO responsibilities could supplement Ryan's income? The testimony that mattered came last. Judge Reeves had child advocate Dr. Ellen Morrison bring Noah to chambers for private interview. Standard procedure, Patricia had explained. Judges want to hear directly from children old enough to express preference. Noah was 6, young but not too young. 30 minutes passed. 40. Diane watched Ryan's leg bounce with anxiety, saw Melissa's confident mask crack slightly. When Dr. Morrison emerged, her expression gave nothing away. She whispered to Judge Reeves, who nodded and called for recess. They reconvened 20 minutes later. Judge Reeves settled behind her bench, reading from notes. This court has reviewed testimony, evidence, and conducted interview with the minor child. Several factors weigh heavily in this decision. She detailed Melissa's abandonment, Ryan's consistency, Noah's clear attachment to his father. Then came the complication. However, Mr. Carter's financial instability and documented PTSD present legitimate concerns about long-term welfare. Ryan's face went pale. Diane felt her stomach drop. Melissa's lawyer allowed himself a small smile, but Judge Reeves wasn't finished. That said, there's a difference between struggling and failing. Mr. Carter has built a successful program serving vulnerable children while managing his own trauma. That demonstrates resilience and character this court values. She looked directly at Melissa. Ms. Carter, your return after 4 years of absence suggests convenience rather than commitment. You claim therapeutic distance but provided no documented evidence. You claim financial support, but Mr. Carter received nothing. Most importantly, Noah expressed clear preference in chambers. Primary custody remains with Mayor Carter. So, Carter, you are granted supervised visitation 1 weekend per month, increasing to unsupervised after 6 months of consistent involvement. You may petition for revised custody after 1 year, provided you demonstrate genuine commitment. The gavel fell. Ryan's exhale came shaky with relief. Noah, waiting outside with a court attendant, was brought in and ran to his father. Melissa sat frozen, her perfect plans shattered by a 6-year-old's honesty and a judge who saw through manufactured narrative. Outside the courthouse, cold November wind cutting through their clothes, Ryan pulled Diane into brief, tight hug. Thank you for everything. The attorney, the character testimony, showing up. I couldn't have done this without you. You would have. But I'm glad I could help. Sophie and Noah stood together, both children sensing the adult victory without fully understanding its scope. Noah grabbed Sophie's hand. You're coming over for pizza, right? Dad promised pizza if we won. Sophie looked at Diane, silent question in her eyes. Diane nodded and Sophie smiled. Full, genuine expression that transformed her face. Pizza sounds perfect. They drove separately to Ryan's apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in 5 Points. Everything clean but worn, furniture mismatched from thrift stores and donations. Noah gave Sophie the grand tour while Diane helped Ryan order pizza and set the table. The domesticity felt natural, like they'd been doing this for years instead of months. When the food arrived and they gathered around Ryan's secondhand dining table, Diane realized this was what family looked like. imperfect, struggling, but present for each other when it mattered. Sophie ate her pizza quietly, listening to Noah's enthusiastic replay of their castle building project from earlier that week. She didn't speak during dinner, but her comfort in Ryan's space was obvious. When Noah suggested they watch a movie, Sophie nodded agreement, and the four of them squeezed onto Ryan's sagging couch, children between adults, sharing space and silence and hard-won peace. Diane's phone buzzed with email from her Stanford contact. Site evaluation scheduled for second chances next week. Early indication. Strong candidate for 3-year funding. Provisional approval for $150K annually pending verification. She showed Ryan, who read it twice before words registered. This is real? 3 years of funding, pending site visit, but my contact doesn't send evaluators unless they're serious. Ryan's eyes filled, and he looked away quickly, but Diane caught the emotion. Stability. The thing family court had questioned. The thing Melissa's lawyer had used as weapon. Now within reach because Sophie had spoken, and Diane had lost her company, and their unlikely partnership had built something neither could have created alone. Later, driving home with Sophie drowsy beside her, Diane considered the architecture of change. 2 months ago, she'd been CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, desperately trying to buy solutions for her silent daughter. Now she was unemployed, her empire sold to competitors, helping a disabled veteran fight for custody while cobbling together funding for a nonprofit. On paper, she'd lost everything. In reality, she'd found what actually mattered: presence over profit, partnership over perfection, showing up for people who needed her instead of managing from distance. Sophie stirred, voice sleepy but clear. Ryan's nice. Noah's my friend. Yes, he is. And yes, he is. Can we help them more? We're already helping, sweetheart. And they're helping us. Good. Sophie's eyes closed again. That's what families do. Diane's throat tightened. Her 8-year-old daughter, who'd spent most of her life locked in silence, had just articulated something it had taken Diane 34 years to understand. Families weren't defined by biology or perfection, but by who showed up when everything fell apart. Ryan had shown up for Sophie. Diane was showing up for Ryan. Their children had shown up for each other. Imperfect, struggling, but undeniably present. The city lights blurred past car windows, Denver settling into evening. Somewhere behind them, Ryan was putting Noah to bed, probably reading the same story 3 times because his son never wanted sleep to arrive. Somewhere ahead, tomorrow waited with its challenges and uncertainties. But tonight, in this moment, they'd won something worth winning. Not perfection, not stability in the way family courts measured it, just the beginning of something real. The site evaluation happened on a December morning when snow threatened, but hadn't yet fallen. Marcus Chen from the Colorado Youth Development Foundation arrived at second chances with clipboard and professional skepticism, the expression of someone who'd seen too many well-intentioned programs fail for lack of sustainability. Ryan gave the tour with quiet competence, showing donated equipment maintained beyond its lifespan, walls painted by volunteer hands, progress charts documenting 15 children's growth across 6 months. Marcus watched Ryan lead a session, observed how he modified activities for different ability levels, noticed the way kids gravitated toward him with trust that couldn't be manufactured. When Amy, the shy foster kid, volunteered to demonstrate a balance exercise she'd been practicing, Marcus made notes. When Lucas asked Ryan for help with homework during break, more notes. When Sophie whispered instructions to Noah during a teamwork drill, Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. The interview afterward happened in Ryan's cramped office, really just a converted storage closet with a desk and 2 chairs. Marcus flipped through documentation, attendance records, parent testimonials, before and after behavioral assessments. Everything professional despite obvious budget constraints. Ryan answered questions about methodology, long-term vision, scalability. Diane sat in on the meeting at Marcus's request, her presence lending credibility Ryan's worn suit and secondhand desk couldn't provide. How do you measure success? Marcus's pen hovered over paper, waiting. Ryan didn't hesitate. Success isn't test scores or athletic achievement. It's the kid who couldn't make eye contact in September, holding conversations in December. It's the foster kid who stops flinching when adults move too fast. It's the girl who hasn't spoken in 8 years finding her voice during a game. He gestured toward the gym where Sophie and Noah were organizing equipment, their partnership now so natural it looked choreographed. That's my metric. Kids learning they're not broken, just figuring things out at their own pace. Marcus made final notes, closed his folder, and delivered the verdict with the faintest smile. Foundation Board meets next week. Barring major surprises, expect approval for 3-year funding. 150,000 annually renewable based on outcomes. Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You've built something worth sustaining. After Marcus left, Ryan sat at his desk for several minutes, head in hands, shoulders shaking. Not crying exactly, but releasing tension he'd carried since the funding cut 3 months ago. Diane gave him space, understanding that some victories needed private processing before they could be shared. When he finally emerged, his eyes were red but clear. 3 years. That's stability. That's what the judge wanted to see. That's what you earned. They collected the children and went to celebrate with ice cream at Little Man, the iconic Denver shop shaped like a milk can. Noah ordered 3 scoops despite knowing he couldn't finish. Sophie chose mint chip with careful deliberation. And the 4 of them sat on the curb in December cold, eating ice cream like it was summer. Passers-by probably saw a normal family, father and son, mother and daughter, shared afternoon treat. The reality was more complicated and somehow better. 2 single parents and their wounded children, building something new from the wreckage of what hadn't worked before. The school board's final evaluation meeting arrived in early December, 60 days after they'd granted emergency extension based on Sophie's first breakthrough. That single whispered word in October had bought time. Now came the moment to prove it wasn't a fluke. Dr. Walsh had requested Diane bring documentation of Sophie's progress. Any evidence that transfer to Meadowbrook wasn't necessary. Diane arrived with a folder thick with notes from Ryan, testimonials from Second Chance's parents, even a letter from Patricia Valdez describing Sophie's courtroom testimony. The board convened in Lincoln Elementary's conference room, 5 members plus Dr. Walsh and Mrs. Henderson. They reviewed materials with the dispassion of bureaucrats making difficult decisions. Board Chair Margaret Sutton led questioning. Your daughter has shown improvement in controlled settings with familiar individuals, but she still doesn't participate verbally in classroom environments. How do you propose she'll meet academic requirements moving forward? Diane had rehearsed responses, prepared arguments about accommodation and alternative assessment. But sitting in that fluorescent-lit room, corporate strategies felt hollow. So she spoke truth instead. My daughter is brilliant. She tests at the top of her class. She understands material better than most neurotypical children. She just can't access traditional participation methods yet. Mrs. Henderson interjected gently. Sophie has made progress this semester. She raised her hand twice last week, pointed to answers on the board. Last month, she helped another student find a lost library book, gestured the whole way but communicated effectively. That's not verbal participation. Margaret's tone wasn't unkind, just pragmatic. Middle school starts next year. Teachers won't have capacity for extensive accommodation. Meadowbrook specializes in exactly this type of challenge. Before Diane could respond, the conference room door opened. Ryan stood there with Sophie and Noah, both children in winter coats, faces flushed from cold. I apologize for interrupting, but Sophie wanted to be here. She has something to say. Margaret frowned at the irregularity, but Dr. Walsh nodded permission. Ryan guided Sophie to the front of the room, Noah holding her hand for support. Sophie looked impossibly small before the board, but her spine held straight, posture determined. My name is Sophie Mitchell. Her voice came quiet but clear, each word carefully enunciated. I know I don't talk at school. It's hard to explain why. My brain tells me talking is dangerous, even when I know it's not. The board members leaned forward, surprise evident on their faces. Mrs. Henderson's hand covered her mouth, eyes already glistening. Sophie continued, words coming slowly but with obvious effort. I'm trying to get better. Mr. Carter helps me practice. Noah is my friend. He doesn't care that I'm quiet. She paused, gathering courage for what came next. I want to stay at Lincoln. This is my school. These are my teachers. If I go somewhere else because I'm different, what does that teach me? That different is wrong? The question hung in air, charged with uncomfortable truth. Sophie looked directly at Margaret. Sometimes children need more time than others. That doesn't mean they need different schools. It means the school needs to be patient. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Sophie added, voice barely above whisper, but audible to everyone. Thank you for listening to me. That took all my courage today. She returned to Ryan's side, legs visibly shaking. Noah wrapped his arms around her waist in fierce hug. The board members exchanged glances, weighted with implications. Margaret cleared her throat. Mrs. Mitchell, your daughter just demonstrated more progress in 2 minutes than months of reports suggested. We'll take this under advisement and notify you of our decision within 48 hours. Outside in the parking lot, Diane knelt before Sophie. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You spoke to a room full of strangers because it mattered. Was I loud enough? Sophie's voice wavered with uncertainty. You were perfect. Ryan's hand rested on her shoulder, steady reassurance. You found your voice when you needed it most. That's all courage is, speaking when your voice shakes. The board's decision arrived Friday via email. Sophie could remain at Lincoln Elementary with modified IEP, allowing nonverbal participation methods where appropriate. The key phrase, demonstrate continued progress toward verbal engagement in classroom settings. Not cured, not fixed, just continuing forward. Christmas arrived wrapped in snow and possibility. Diane's consulting work had gained momentum. 3 contracts providing income without the crushing hours of CEO life. She'd moved to a smaller condo near Ryan's neighborhood, proximity making their increasingly frequent dinners easier. Sophie and Noah had become inseparable. Their friendship, the kind that transcended typical childhood bonds. They understood each other's wounds without needing explanation. Christmas Eve, they gathered at Ryan's apartment, space too small for 4 people, and a second-hand tree decorated with homemade ornaments. Noah had insisted on making decorations from construction paper, resulting in lopsided stars and angels with disproportionate wings. Sophie contributed drawings of winter scenes, each one more detailed than the last. They strung them together with yarn and covered Ryan's tree in children's art instead of expensive ornaments. Ryan cooked dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, nothing fancy but made with care. They ate crowded around a small table, knees bumping, passing garlic bread and stories. Noah dominated conversation, recounting every injustice and triumph of second grade in exhaustive detail. Sophie listened with the attention she brought to everything, occasionally adding whispered comments that made Noah grin. After dinner, Ryan produced presents wrapped in newspaper comics. For Noah, a captain's hat he'd found at a vintage shop, official-looking with gold braid. For Sophie, a blank journal with leather cover, space for drawings and words both. Diane had brought gifts too, books for both children, a new hoodie for Ryan because his old one had holes. Sophie disappeared to Ryan's room, returning with something hidden behind her back. She approached Ryan with unusual solemnity, placed a drawing in his hands. He studied it silently. 4 figures in a park, holding hands in a line, all of them smiling. Labeled in careful print, "My family." Ryan's voice came rough. "This is the best present I've ever received, brave girl. Can I keep it?" Sophie nodded, then surprised everyone by stepping forward to hug him. Not quick or perfunctory, but genuine embrace that Ryan returned with careful gentleness. When they separated, Diane saw tears tracking down his face, no attempt to hide them. Sometimes grown men cried, and children needed to see that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but honesty about what mattered. The new year brought steady progress measured in small increments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Sophie spoke more frequently at second chances sessions, occasional words at home, rare but increasing utterances at school. Mrs. Henderson reported she'd answered a direct question in class, single-word response that made the teacher momentarily forget her lesson plan. Other students had stopped finding Sophie's silence remarkable, accepting her as the quiet girl who sometimes talked, usually didn't, always understood. February arrived with the kind of cold that made Denver feel Arctic, temperatures dropping below zero, snow piled in gray mountains along every street. Melissa made her first supervised visitation with Noah, awkward lunch at a family restaurant, with court-appointed supervisor observing every interaction. Noah was polite but distant, treating his mother like a stranger wearing familiar face. When she asked about his favorite things, he mentioned Sophie 3 times, Ryan constantly, never once referenced memories that included Melissa. The wound of her abandonment had scabbed over, but scar tissue remained sensitive. March brought crisis neither Diane nor Ryan had anticipated. Sophie's class was preparing for the spring program, annual showcase where students demonstrated skills learned throughout the year. Mrs. Henderson had assigned Sophie a nonverbal role, operating the curtain, perfect accommodation for a child who couldn't speak publicly. But Sophie surprised everyone by asking, in whispered conference during recess, if she could read a poem instead. Mrs. Henderson relayed this via phone call that evening, her voice mixing excitement with concern. I want to support her, but I'm worried about the pressure. What if she freezes? What if the other kids laugh? We'd be setting her up for failure in front of the entire school. Diane put the call on speaker so Ryan could hear. He'd become default co-parent in ways neither of them had formally acknowledged. His input weighted equally in decisions affecting Sophie. They looked at each other across Diane's kitchen table, silent communication passing between them. This was Sophie's choice. They could protect her from potential failure or trust she knew her own readiness. Let her try, Ryan's voice carried quiet conviction. Worst case, she freezes and we're there to catch her. Best case, she proves to herself what she's capable of. Mrs. Henderson agreed to list Sophie as poetry reader in the program. Backup plan prepared, but hope extended. For the next 6 weeks, Sophie practiced relentlessly. She'd chosen a short poem by Shel Silverstein, whimsical piece about a girl finding her voice. Appropriate almost to the point of being too on the nose, but Sophie loved it. She practiced in her room, voice barely audible through the door. Practiced in the car driving to Second Chances. Practiced with Noah as audience. His enthusiastic applause after every attempt providing encouragement more effective than any adult's praise. The spring program fell on a Wednesday evening in late April. Lincoln Elementary's auditorium packed with parents wielding phones ready to capture their children's moments. Diane sat in the third row between Ryan and Noah, all three of them radiating anxiety despite attempts at calm. The program opened with kindergarten songs, progressed through various grade-level performances, each child's family erupting in disproportionate applause. Sophie's class took the stage for their poetry segment. 8 children total, each reading a different poem. Sophie was scheduled 6th, positioned so she could watch others first. The early readers performed competently, some stumbling over words, others racing through lines eager to finish. When the 5th child completed his poem about baseball, Mrs. Henderson announced, Sophie Mitchell will now read Finding Voice by Shel Silverstein. Sophie walked to the microphone with visible tremors, paper clutched in hands that shook enough to make the pages rustle audibly. She looked out at the audience, hundreds of faces, strangers and classmates, and judgment potential in every direction. Her eyes found Diane in the third row, then Ryan beside her, then Noah giving enthusiastic thumbs up. She opened her mouth. Nothing emerged. Seconds ticked past, stretching into uncomfortable territory where audience members shifted, where parents exchanged concerned glances, where failure seemed inevitable. Mrs. Henderson moved slightly, ready to intervene. Then Noah stood up in the third row, clearly visible in his red Captain America shirt. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, You're the bravest astronaut, Sophie. You can do this. The audience chuckled at the outburst. Ryan pulled Noah back to his seat with gentle firmness, but something in Noah's unfiltered confidence reached Sophie through her panic. She looked at the paper in her hands, took breath that lifted her shoulders visibly even from distance, and began, I used to think my voice was broken. Words stuck inside like stones. Her voice came quiet but amplified by microphone, carrying to every corner of the auditorium. The audience stilled, recognizing they were witnessing something beyond typical childhood performance. Sophie continued, each line a small victory. But then I learned that silence speaks too, in gestures, art, and all I've grown. And now I'm learning words have power, to heal, connect, to make me known. She finished the poem's final stanza, voice growing fractionally stronger with each line. When she spoke the last words, my voice was never lost, just waiting for the right time to be found. The auditorium erupted in standing ovation. Not polite applause, but genuine celebration, recognition that they'd witnessed courage far beyond reciting poetry. Sophie fled the stage immediately, not staying for curtain call or group bow. Diane found her backstage, pressed against the wall, whole body shaking with aftermath of adrenaline. She scooped her daughter into her arms, feeling Sophie's heart hammering against her own chest. You did it. You spoke in front of hundreds of people. You were magnificent. Was I loud enough? Sophie's question came muffled against Diane's shoulder, the same worry she always carried. Ryan appeared with Noah, both of them squeezing into the backstage chaos. You were perfect. Not too loud, not too soft, just exactly Sophie. Noah hugged Sophie fiercely. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. You're like a superhero, but with poems. They left through the side exit, avoiding the crowd, finding sanctuary in the parking lot where April evening had turned sharp with unexpected cold. Sophie was exhausted, drained in the way profound effort always leaves people hollow. But she was also lighter, the weight of self-doubt slightly diminished by evidence of her own capability. The following week brought unexpected opportunity. Medidata Corporation, the contract Diane had been negotiating when she lost her CEO position, reached out directly to her. Their attempt to work with Apex's new leadership had collapsed, communication breakdown and personality conflicts derailing the deal. Would Diane be interested in consulting? They'd provide funding for her to build a small, independent team, maintain control over project direction, work flexible schedule. Based in Denver, not Chicago. The offer represented resurrection of the professional identity she'd thought permanently lost. But the terms felt different this time, structured around life rather than consuming it. She'd work from home 3 days weekly, office 2 days. Project deadlines designed around sustainable pace rather than breakneck sprints. Income substantial but not excessive, enough for security without demanding total sacrifice. She discussed it with Ryan that evening while their children played in her condo's courtyard. The practical question: if she took this, could they maintain the balance they'd found? The deeper question lurking beneath: were they building something together or just parallel single parents supporting each other? Take it. Ryan's response came immediate, confident. You've earned this, and we'll figure out the rest like we figure out everything else, one day at a time. Together. Together. The word hung between them, weighted with implications they'd been dancing around for months. Neither had formally defined their relationship beyond co-parenting friends. But the boundaries had blurred weeks ago, comfort level suggesting something more permanent than convenience. Is that what we are? Together? Ryan took her hand, calloused fingers warm against hers. I think we've been together since Sophie taught Noah about patient observation, and he taught her about fearless participation. Our kids figured it out before we did. Diane laughed, surprised by how simple the acknowledgement felt. Weeks of uncertainty resolved by recognizing what already existed. They weren't rushing toward anything, just acknowledging what they'd already built. Partnership, family, home constructed from imperfect pieces that somehow fit together. Summer arrived hot and bright, Denver heat baking the city into siesta pace. Sophie completed 4th grade, report card showing academic excellence, and modified assessment for verbal participation. Next year, she'd start 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary, same school, same teachers who'd learned to value her unique contributions. Noah finished 2nd grade with enough energy left over to power small cities. His teachers note reading, enthusiastic participation sometimes exceeds indoor voice guidelines, but Noah's kind heart makes him a joy. July brought 9 months since their first meeting at Riverside Park. They returned to that same playground one summer afternoon, children immediately racing toward equipment while adults settled on their original bench. The park looked unchanged. Same swings, same slides, same cottonwood trees offering shade. But everything else had transformed. Ryan had started therapy for PTSD, weekly sessions helping him develop better coping mechanisms. The panic attacks still came occasionally, but less frequently, less severe. Second chances had expanded to 23 enrolled kids, waiting lists growing as word spread about the program's effectiveness. Melissa had maintained monthly visitations, slowly rebuilding relationship with Noah through supervised structure and professional guidance. Not mother-son bond yet, but acquaintance developing towards something more. Diane's consulting firm had grown to include two other professionals, small team handling multiple contracts. The work challenged her intellectually without consuming her entirely, balance she'd never achieved as CEO. She'd sold her Tesla, bought a practical Honda CR-V, moved to a three-bedroom condo with yard space where children could play. Sophie's bedroom included dedicated art corner, walls covered with her increasingly sophisticated drawings. Most significant, Sophie spoke regularly now, not constantly, not without effort, but consistently enough that strangers no longer immediately registered her silence as defining characteristic. She'd made two friends at school, girls who appreciated her quiet observation and occasional profound insights. She testified at Melissa's 6-month custody review, speaking clearly about feeling safe with Noah's dad, comfortable with supervised visits, but not ready for more. Judge Reeves had maintained existing arrangement based partly on Sophie's testimony. As they sat watching their children play that July afternoon, Diane considered the architecture of transformation. 9 months ago, she'd been desperate, drowning in failure, convinced money could solve what love hadn't fixed. Now she understood. Sometimes children needed less fixing and more accepting. Sophie hadn't been broken. She'd been waiting for safe space to emerge at her own pace, in her own way. Ryan, what would you think about making this official? The question surprised her almost as much as him. But sitting there in summer heat, watching Sophie and Noah collaborate on some elaborate game involving superhero astronaut pirates, the future suddenly felt navigable rather than terrifying. Official how? His voice carried careful hope. I'm not sure exactly. Commitment ceremony, maybe. Nothing legal or complicated, just acknowledgement that we're building family together intentionally, not just stumbling into it. Ryan absorbed this quietly, then smiled. Only if Sophie and Noah get to plan it. This is as much about them as us. They proposed it that evening over pizza, children's input shaping every detail. Noah insisted on the park as location, anniversary spot where everything started. Sophie wanted yellow, her favorite color, as theme. Both children demanded roles as co-ring bearers, joint responsibility they took seriously. The planning consumed August. Small ceremony, scheduled for late October, exactly 1 year after their first meeting. The morning arrived cloudless and warm, Colorado autumn at its finest. They'd invited 30 people. Second Chance's families, Patricia Valdez, Marcus Chen from the foundation, Mrs. Henderson, a handful of Diane's consulting colleagues. Judge Reeves agreed to officiate, bringing symmetry to the narrative. The woman who'd nearly separated Ryan and Noah now celebrating their expanded family. The ceremony was simple, no formal structure beyond exchange of promises. Ryan spoke about finding unexpected family when he'd stopped looking for perfect solutions. Diane talked about learning presence mattered more than perfection, that her daughter had taught her more about courage than any boardroom ever had. Sophie and Noah presented rings, simple silver bands they'd helped select, with exaggerated solemnity that made everyone smile. Judge Reeves addressed the gathered friends. We often think of family as something we're born into, but the best families are the ones we choose. These 4 people have chosen each other, not despite their struggles, but because they understand that struggle is part of love. Before pronouncing them committed partners, Judge Reeves turned to Sophie. Would you like to say anything? Sophie stood, yellow dress moving in October breeze. She looked at the small crowd, then at Ryan and her mother and Noah. A year ago, I couldn't talk to anyone. I was scared all the time. Ryan showed me that silence is okay, but so is speaking. Noah showed me that friends don't care if you're different. Mom showed me she'd give up anything to be here when I needed her. She paused, then addressed the gathering directly. Sometimes the thing you need most isn't fixing. It's someone who sees you're not broken. Ryan sees all of us that way, so I'm glad he's my dad now, even if paperwork says different. The words carried across grass and sidewalk, reaching every corner of their makeshift ceremony space. Several people wiped eyes. Noah bounced on his toes but remained mostly still, sensing the moment's weight. Sophie continued, We're not a perfect family, but we're a real one. That's better. She sat down, speech complete. Judge Reeves's voice carried emotion she rarely displayed in courtroom. By the power vested in me by absolutely nothing official, I declare you a family. Not by blood or law, but by choice and love. That's the strongest kind. They released butterflies Sophie and Noah had raised together, watching them scatter into Denver sky. Noah called out, "Fly high, butterflies." Sophie added, voice clear, "Be free and brave." The celebration afterward involved cake and playground games, adults and children mixing in the easy chaos of community gathering. Diane found herself standing with Ryan near the swings where everything had started, watching Sophie push Noah higher than he could manage alone, both children laughing with the unself-conscious joy of secure childhood. A year ago, I would have paid anything to hear her laugh like that. Diane's voice came soft. Now I know the price wasn't money. It was learning to stop controlling and start trusting. Ryan's arms settled around her shoulders. She was always going to find her voice. You just had to believe her timeline was valid. They stood together as afternoon stretched toward evening, watching their children play, surrounded by friends who'd become family. Imperfect, struggling, but undeniably present for each other. Sophie had been right in her ceremony speech. Not a perfect family, but a real one. And real was better than any fantasy Diane had tried to purchase. The city spread around them, Denver autumn painting everything gold. Sophie's voice carried across the playground, calling to Noah about their next adventure. Clear and confident and beautifully, impossibly hers. The silence that had defined her for 8 years had transformed, not eliminated, but integrated into who she was. A girl who observed carefully, spoke sparingly, loved deeply, exactly as she was meant to be. Diane squeezed Ryan's hand, feeling Sophie's journey and her own intertwined with his and Noah's. 4 separate stories becoming single narrative. Sometimes families were born. Sometimes they were built, piece by careful piece, from people brave enough to choose each other despite every reason not to. This was the second kind. Harder won, more precious for the effort required. A family forged in playground sand and courtroom testimony, in moments of profound courage, when small voices shook but spoke anyway. Sometimes children needed less fixing and more accepting. Sometimes adults needed to learn the same lesson. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found people who understood that being present was the only cure that mattered. Not for silence, but for the loneliness that made silence unbearable.